see the presentation. What we are going to present, my name is Maximiliano Viraciane, and I'm going to present this paper with my colleague Carla Álvarez Velasco from the Institute of Advanced National Studies, and I am from the National University of San Martin. She's from Ecuador, I'm from Argentina. So this topic has to do with the Chinese surveillance state in Latin America. During the last decades, we have seen the spread of many Chinese companies selling surveillance technologies all over the world, in particular in Latin America. And this process has received a lot of criticism, mainly from Western analysts, media, and government officials. And they usually advance their criticisms with two arguments. So on the one hand, they condemned and denounced the very problematic practices in specific cases within China. Perhaps the most prominent one is the use of facial recognition in Xinjiang. And the other part of the argument, that is that the one that we wanted to examine, is the claim that the sale of Chinese surveillance technologies into other countries of the Global South is going to reproduce the same problematic practices that they denounce and criticize and condemn within China. For instance, they claim that autocracies are going to become more autocratic, that democracies may backslide into autocracies, and that is a general statement that they make for all of the countries in the Global South. And in particular, for Latin America, we find several authors making the claim that it's all the fault of anti-US leftist populism that is looking to emulate these surveillance practices that China implements within its regions. Now, considering this previous literature, what we found is that most of these claims have a serious limit, that they are based on limited empirical work or empirical evidence. Now, that seemed, at least when we started doing this research, a bit problematic. So we wanted to examine whether, with on-the-ground data, we could confirm these processes or there was more nuance involved. And to advance our argument, what we are going to say is that, in fact, we need a far more differentiated and situated approach to understand how these implementation of surveillance systems work, in which Chinese technologies are involved. And we claim three things, mainly, that even though in these previous documents, most of these systems are portrayed as Chinese surveillance systems, in fact, they are not entirely Chinese because there are other actors involved, and they cover far more dimensions than just surveillance. The first point, that they are not just Chinese, has to do with the fact that the agency in these projects is far more distributed than what critics assume. And here we argue that we need to distinguish between who initiated the project, who designed them, who manages and operates the systems, and who makes the upgrades. And regarding that last criticism related to the political leaning of the regime types, we also found that it's independent of political leaning, the procurement of these technologies. Besides these three main points, we also found that the criticisms in the Anglophone literature doesn't coincide with the criticisms that the projects do receive locally. So there we found another divergence between our empirical data and what we know so far about these systems. How did we arrive to these conclusions? We compared two case studies of Chinese surveillance systems built by Chinese state-owned companies in Argentina and Ecuador, namely ECU 911 in Ecuador and Jujuy Segura Interconectado in Argentina. We selected state-owned companies because we assumed that if the state connection is more open directly, this claim that they would transfer similar practices seen in China would be more evident. And we also selected these two projects because they are frequently mentioned in these documents by media outlets, academics, and policy documents criticizing the spread of digital authoritarianism by China. And to contrast all this, we collected, on the one hand, official and policy documents, web pages. We considered the local security situation and previous trajectories within each context. And besides, we made in-depth interviews with the managers the current and the previous of both projects, and critics as well from civil society. Now my colleague is going to continue with the Ecuador case.
Thank you, Maxi. Okay, the installation of ECO 9/11 in Ecuador must be contextualized in a broader political transformation that the country experienced during the administration of former President Rafael Correa. In terms of foreign policy, Correa strengthened political and trade alliances within and outside the Latin American region. One of the goals was to weaken Ecuador's economic and political dependence on the US. At the same time, the government saw a strategic rapprochement to China with the aim of increasing its exports to Asian nations, as well as accessing to its funding sources. In terms of security policy, the government introduced the integral security concept that was formulated less linked to the field of defense and closer to the notion of human security. The new concept evolved in time and led to a planning process whose outcomes were 2 consecutive national plans for integral security. In the first plan, it was announced the creation of an integrated security system named ECO 9/11 to respond to every type of emergencies that citizens may face. The idea was that any citizen would be able to contact ECO 9/11 through a unique 911 telephone number. The system was planned to be heavily reliant on information and communication technologies and to articulate the work of different public and private agencies, thereby contributing to the notion of integral security. Next, please. The design of the system was decided after multiple visits, which took place between 2008 and 2011 by a technical commission from Ecuador to several smart cities in Argentina, Brazil, Colombia, China, England, Panama, Spain, US, among others. However, the ECO 9/11 system was mainly inspired by a visit to an international conference where Ecuadorian public officials saw Chinese firms selling smart city systems. That visit led to a contact with the Chinese embassy in Ecuador, which offered the financing to develop a project tailored to Ecuador needs, on the condition that it has to be implemented by a state-owned enterprise. China National Electronic Import and Export Corporation, CEIEC, was the chosen company. Based in Beijing and founded in 1980, the firm had an overseas engineering division with experience in integration engineering projects in numerous sectors for countries in Africa and Asia. Furthermore, CEIEC had the advantage of having provided the security system for the Olympic Games. Additionally, the firm offered to Ecuadorian government to develop a software that integrates all the technological components of the security integral system. Additionally, CEIEC allowed the local government to freely choose its technological suppliers from anywhere in the world. As it were not enough, Chinese government was ECO 9/11 financer and provided $240 million to the same. Next, please. To 2011, the Ecuadorian government signed an agreement with CEIEC to develop the ECO 9/11 project. On February 2012, former President Correa inaugurated the first national node of ECO 9/11 in the coastal city of San Borondón. From then onwards, 15 other nodes of the system were installed across the country. ECO 9/11 started with 40,600 cameras throughout the country. This number was growing progressively. Today, there is approx 6,000 cameras throughout the country. It is important to mention that ecosystem does not have facial recognition capabilities. On the other hand, the system covers any emergency from 95% of the population, and it articulates all the institutions related to integral security, such as the National Police, the hospitals, National Transit Agency, the Fire Department, and the Ministry of National Defense, among other institutions. The initial phase of ECO 9/11 shows at least two particularities. It is wrong to assume ECO 9/11 was the result of China's intention to export its system to Ecuador. Reversely, the agency lies mainly on Ecuador public officials who wanted to materialize the integral security concept. And second, ECO 9/11 was not created simply as a surveillance system. Rather, it is a more ambitious system that articulates different functions of the state to deal primarily with emergency to its citizens. So tagging ECO 9/11 as surveillance system is a simplification that ignores how the system materialized the broader organizational changes that were taking place in the security of Ecuador. The factors that affect ECO 9/11 are the following. In 2017, the results of the presidential elections that took place in Ecuador affected the development of trajectory of ECO 9/11. Yes. Lenin Moreno won the presidential election. He was supported by former President Correa, but soon after his inauguration, they broke with his personal and political relations. This cleavage significantly modified numerous policies in Ecuador. Former President Moreno denounced his predecessor as authoritarian and corrupt. Additionally, he wanted to distance himself from Correa leftist policies and brought back again policies characterized as neoliberal. In this context, the Ecuadorian government reduced the public budget to finance several areas, including ECO 9/11. But the budget diminished even more when COVID pandemic arrived. The sanitary emergency forced the government to prioritize healthcare before any other social services. With regard to foreign policies, Moreno presidency realigned Ecuador with US interests. In terms of security policy, the integral security ideal was set aside to prioritize more militarized security strategies. And by 2021, Ecuador held elections again. The result was the right-wing candidate Guillermo Lasso became president. This main continuity with the political line of former President Lenin Moreno. About foreign criticism, on 2019, international media criticized ECO 9/11. Western media and some analysts said that the system is the evidence of Chinese government intention to export its authoritarian model to the global South. They said that the surveillance system was used to persecute political opponents. About local criticism within the country, critics has been less significant. Certain sectors of civil society fear of surveillance technology abuse. Thought this fear is not limited to Chinese technologies. On the other hand, accusations of corruption to Chinese companies involved with the installation of ECO 9/11 have had a greater impact on the society. Next, please. Regardless of achievements during previous years, since 2017, the system suffered a deterioration on its technological infrastructure. In fact, official figures indicate that in 2019, 54% of the cameras were outside their useful life period. This decade of the system is explained by the political change that took place in the country in 2017. However, Ecuador did not renew CEIEC contract that ended on December 2018 due to US sanctions against CEIEC and due to US pressure to choose other providers. At the end, CEIEC passing through Ecuador has shown the vulnerability of the country to technological dependency. Thanks, Maxi.
Thanks, Carla. So now I'm going to conclude with the other case study to contrast some dimensions. This other case took place in the northern province of Jujuy in Argentina, that you can see there in the map. In 2016, a new governor was chosen, elected. No, one of his main campaign promises was to upgrade the pre-existing surveillance systems that the capital city had, that had been built with German technology mainly. And when the Ministry of Security began searching for alternatives, the first one that they studied was the most famous safe city or smart city in Argentina, that is located in the city of Tigre, and its whole technology is supplied by a Japanese firm, NEC. However, this model involved the leasing of the cameras, while the province wanted to own the cameras. So they discarded this alternative. Then they visited another case in the province of Salta, that is the nearby province. And there they found that the video surveillance model that they had was applied by a Mexican firm that controlled the telecommunications network and provided a service for the video cameras, and the video cameras that was sold both first by Huawei and then by ZTE. The problem here that they found is that the telecoms network was owned by the Mexican firm, and Huawei wanted to own both a telecommunications network and the cameras. However, this last visit led to a contact with ZTE, who said, oh, wait, we can provide you the tailored model that you want. And furthermore, we can get some sort of loan or funding from the Chinese state to get this project done. So that proposal was interesting from the province, but instead of accepting a direct procurement that ZTE wanted, they arranged an international tender for the project. Let me just mention here that in terms of technology, both these suppliers, the Japanese firm or the Chinese firms, were offering more or less the same technologies. So the following year, the province, at the end of 2016, the province launched the tender Jujuy Seguro and Interconectado that had two main components. On the one hand, a video surveillance system of 600 cameras for the capital city to be extended to others. And on the other hand, the main part of the project was the construction of over 300 kilometers to connect around 310 points of government, ministries, schools, police stations, that the province didn't have yet. Of course, ZTE won the tender. It was the only bidder, and that immediately raised suspicions by the local opposition on two main grounds. On the one hand, they didn't want to enter into a loan in dollars with China for this project because the budget of the province was already quite weak, to say it mildly. And on the other hand, they accused the government of corruption. Although that was not proven, the allegation was, well, there was just one bidder. Here, there's something that is murky, no? But the point that I want to stress is that no one criticized the upgrade of the system. Once again, because that has to do with this citizens' demand that there's this belief, however questionable it might be, that these systems are going to solve the insecurity situations that citizens perceive. In 2017, the government signed the agreement with ZTE in Beijing, but for contractual reasons, it was delayed. It was only started in 2019, when a ZTE executive visited the province. They organized a special task force composed both of Chinese workers and local workers, and they initiated the project, promising to turn Jujuy into a safe, interconnected, and intelligent city. Immediately, the project was portrayed by foreign media and reproduced in the policy documents and by policy observers, mainly from the US, that follow Latin American-China relations, denouncing the menacing expansion of the Chinese surveillance state into the province. But again, if we take into account the information on the ground, even today, the project hasn't been finished yet, to different delays. So, well, the concerns seem a bit, excessive, at least in 2019. Besides, the project is entirely managed and operated by local actors, by the Ministry of Security and the local police. And we also have to consider that this was ignored in the documents that we read, that the province already had a surveillance system built by the previous administration that was left-wing, and the one that we were studying now was a center right-wing that chose to cooperate with China. And the reason to cooperate with China was not ideological. When we talked with the public officials, they said, no, here there's a cost reason, and the loan was quite attractive for choosing the Chinese company. So the point that we conclude here is that ZTE is displacing some other Western competitors, and that seems to be more reasonable, a more reasonable argument to make. Nonetheless, I want to point out that opposition politicians do fear the system by being misused, and civil society organizations criticize that most of these systems, not just those built with Chinese companies lack impact assessments to human rights, and they lack independent accountability mechanisms. And just to conclude, just to summarize the key points, these projects, the framing of them as Chinese surveillance projects seems inadequate, no, because other dimensions were involved. They are not entirely Chinese. The agency is quite distributed. Of course, this means that the deployment of the projects may not necessarily reproduce the surveillance practices that we see in China. Finally, this idea that they are ideologically driven, the business, well, it seems to be false. The cost and funding advantages is what explains the procurement. And the last point to mention is that there's a clear divergence between the foreign coverage of the projects and the local criticisms that they receive. The foreign seems to be more concerned of framing these projects within this narrative of the technological or Cold War, if you want, repeating this narrative of the expansion of digital authoritarianism, while the local coverage is more concerned on the alleged corruption allegations in the procurement process and not questioning the effectiveness or need of the systems. Policymakers are more concerned about technological dependence, particularly of the software platforms. And civil society organizations, they criticize these projects, but they equally criticize all other suppliers, no, for the reasons that I mentioned in the previous slide. So to conclude, we think, no, that we need a far more differentiated and situated approach to complexify this linear narrative that exists in the literature about surveillance studies, in particular the Chinese technologies. Our cases did not support the thesis of the expansion of these practices in Argentina and Ecuador, though our approach does not exclude it in other contexts of the Global South, so that's important to stress. And perhaps for future research, we might need to compare different regimes. The two cases that we compared were democratic, different regions, and perhaps different suppliers of surveillance technologies from different countries.
Thank you very much.
Good evening for everybody. And I am Miguel Henriques de Carvalho. This paper we did together, me and the professor of economics from Federal University of Rio Grande do Norte, Esther Majorvitz. And I will present the most important results of this paper in this moment. The title of our paper is China's Expansion in Brazilian Digital Surveillance Markets Between Public Actors and Foreign Enterprise. Sorry. So our introduction to start this research, we first of all, we recognize that in Brazil in recently years, we assist an accelerate of proliferation of high technology surveillance systems, particularly those embedded with facial recognition. For instance, we take this data from Migliano and Howie Williams. Brazil now it's the first largest consumer worldwide of outside China with Hikvision and Dahua surveillance camera networks. From 2019 to the present, we have a different moment in our political stance, because now from 2019, Brazilian president has been exercised by President Jair Bolsonaro, a far-right figure in the national political spectrum. It's a change for the past when we had, for example, the Labour Party in Worker Party in the government. And in the foreign policy, this had a very important shift when we see Bolsonaro represent a stance of hostility towards and they strengthen it towards United States, and they have a problem with China, at least in the discourse level. So there is, in the other hand, in Brazil, we have, like the other presenters did before us, a demand in the country for expansion of surveillance system as a way to fight crimes. Many people, many politicians at least, not just the far-right politicians, talk about includes the adoption of facial recognition technologies for public security. In fact, when people don't bring some data to say if it's good or not, but it's a recurrent theme we assist nowadays in Brazil about the public security. It's the adoption of facial recognition. And in this paper, our general objectives is, first of all, to study China's expansion in digital surveillance technology in Brazil during Bolsonaro government. His term finishing this year, we will have elections in October. So, and the special, it's the surveillance cameras with facial recognition. And about this, it's important to say, first of all, that we didn't find so many studies about this. In fact, the opposite, just few studies. And the other point, our research is a preliminary effort, different than other papers present here today, because we just started in April 2022. And we're trying to deepen the study of the STEM in Brazilian case. Additionally, we try to contribute to the current literature on China and the export of digital surveillance technology by focus on local government and their political inclinations. Because this is important to say also because Brazil has 3 levels of government: the municipalities or cities government. We are a federation as United States, so state governments, and the presidents, the national government. And it's not, it's frequent, the difference of the inclination, political inclination of this level of government. And we try to find some difference between these levels and inclinations about the theme of the surveillance technology, in special the facial recognition. So the contents of the article is beyond the introduction, the literature review on digital authoritarianism. We are not talking too much about this because I think the other presentation did more, and you are focusing the findings of the papers, at least the findings we already achieved in this moment. Talk a little bit about our analytical methodology, and finally the presentation with discussion and conclusions. So about the digital surveillance, the first point it's important to stress, it's the digital authoritarianism is a concept that represents a distinctive political regime. And it has a problem. We try to problematize this term because it's a United States government perception of the question. But when we try to show that this is not just United States, but many countries, even authoritarian or democratic, did the same thing about this theme. This is to say, trying to put forward more digital surveillance to surveillance people for many reasons: terrorism, security, etc. The second is highlights the above mentioned concepts has been operationalized by the US and the close allies to contain China's expansion in foreign markets, particularly find echoes in Bolsonaro government. Because in our perception, this speech from United States, it's a strategy to try to block China in expansion in third markets, as Brazil, for instance, this kind of technology. And China has enormous potential to expansion surveillance technology. And in spite of the fact that Bolsonaro, at least in the rhetoric level, saying in the beginning of his term, and continues saying he will put diplomatic obstacles. And we try to see which kind of obstacle Bolsonaro put for China to expansion of the surveillance system. And in the end, we try to analyze the different local government relations with and the procurement of the surveillance technology with China, because one of our hypotheses that the local government negotiated directly with China about these technologies beyond the federal government. And the specific objectives of this paper is to contribute to understand whether political tensions arising in the rhetorical authoritarianism may impact procurement from this technology. We different wherever China's expansion was facilitated or hampered government's political alignments opposition to Bolsonaro. And the second hand, to contribute to shed light on the multiplicity of suppliers, demanders with diverse political status. that compose digital surveillance markets through the case of Brazil in the period of the rise of the far right, not only the president, but also in some local governments. Instead to assuming of the mechanical and univocal link that associates China of digital surveillance system to authoritarian political system or political with authoritarian inclinations. So this common sense about this theme, it's China just do this with the authoritarian political system, and that's all. But in our perception, we're trying to show that it's not so easy to understand this movement, and this movement is more general than supposed to be in the sense common, because even the center-left or left-wing governments did the same thing about the surveillance system, digital surveillance system in Brazil. About our analytical methodology, first we try to triangulation of three sources to make this research. First, trying to as much as possible to read the academic literature about this theme. We also read the gray literature in the form of trade journals and other outlets, and this is important because don't have so many academic literature about this theme. And the most important thing will be, or try to be, the primary documentation in the form of government policy documentations, official announcement, government bid and procurement records, interviews with the government representatives, at least from the Northeast region. And this is the most important problem of our research, because it's a very sensitive topic in general, corruption allegation in bids involving Chinese companies in some case. And in the end, and now we are living an electoral process, and many of the several officials don't want to talk about this because they are run in this election. So it's a very difficult problem to make the interviews, to try to make interviews. But anyway, we still trying to make more and more interviews to complete the research. And we did this research in two stages or two levels. First, to try to see, first of all, in some representative states and cities across the Brazil and across the different political spectrum. And we choose some cities have many important experience with the digital surveillance since Bolsonaro began the Jair Bolsonaro presidency. This is important. So we choose, for instance, São Paulo state, the city of Campinas, it's important state of São Paulo, and other places have important experience with the digital surveillance. And in the other hand, in the second stage, we make a more closer research about the Northeast region. And this is important because Northeast region, it's the poorest region in Brazil, and is the region that all the government, they are opposition of Bolsonaro. And they are almost all the governments. One of them, they are a little bit opposition, not completely opposition. And we discovered that even in the Northeast region, when we had center-left parties in the government, we see the same process as about the surveillance, digital surveillance. So, sorry. So this is the Brazilian map, and it just is to see that's the Northeast, the green part of the map. And we choose some cities as Aparecida de Goiânia, Petrolina, Campinas in São Paulo, some cities that is important, the experience of the digital surveillance, Mogi das Cruzes, also in São Paulo, to try to show to the reader of our paper that which kind of the contract and the experience Brazil have in some place. And in the second part, we focus in the Northeast region. So the some places we choose, we choose 3 states, Rondônia, Roraima, and São Paulo, and 3 cities, Aparecida de Goiânia, Campinas, and also the state of Espírito Santo. And we can see that even the far right and center right, opposition or not opposition of Bolsonaro, they did the same thing to adopt the technologies in these last 4 years of surveillance, digital surveillance, even they are opposition or not of Bolsonaro. And in the other hand, we can see almost all, because Alagoas has a partial opposition of Bolsonaro, all of the states of Northeast, they are opposition of Bolsonaro. And as I will talk later, they also adopt the technologies, but with difference, but in the sense of the movement is the same. This is something growing up in Brazil, this kind of technology that they adopt the digital surveillance. So the first finding of our paper that we want to share with you, it's the overall, the evidence has shown the involvement of Brazilian state government across the different political spectrum from center left to the far right in the acquisition of China's surveillance technology, even they are not with authoritarian inclinations. So this is the first point to show. It is one of the most important results of our paper, because the common sense is that only the far right parties or the parties with authoritarian inclination did this adoption of the surveillance technology in the recent years. It's especially true when we analyze the several states from Northeast region, where they are governed by the center-left opposition. And some of the examples, it's very important. At least Bahia, Ceará, Sergipe, Rio Grande do Norte, they are very important. And we try to show with some examples, with some interviews we couldn't find, we could do about these cases, to try to show that this adoption of facial recognition is something it's running fast in Brazil in the recent years. The second finding, important finding we achieved is that although despite Bolsonaro did the anti-China platform, the US foreign policy echoes Brazilian foreign policy during the Trump administration, because after Biden administration, Bolsonaro has a at least ambiguous relationship in certain terms, as in Trump, it's directly the alignment from both of them. The tensions that there with China at the end of the day, they are more rhetoric than anything else. So we didn't see in Brazil in that time a important difference between Brazil and local governments, and even federal government and China about this theme of the digital surveillance. And not only the influence of the US foreign policy at Brazilian federal government not carried through to the local level, but also the own federal government put its discourse into practice since it have been involved in many cases. This is important because the security, it's something, many of the security themes, it's something from local and government level. And hence digital authoritarianism, a strategy to contain digital China's change on expansion in third markets, has until now, Brazil in surveillance technology under deep and ideologized political leaders. So in fact, this is not, US didn't interrupt the China's expansion in Brazil in this time, at least in Brazilian case, and as we can see in the other presentations, seems that China entering all the markets about this theme, not just this, but the surveillance systems, digital surveillance systems. The third finding is surveillance cameras with facial recognition. China companies, for example, Dahua, Hikvision in Huawei, have dominated Brazilian markets in the facial recognition technologies. However, the research until now has shown that this not means that China's is only China or Chinese companies in these markets. And we can also see other countries, companies from other countries involved in this structure. And enterprising, at least from democratic countries, have provided facial recognition to both private and public security force in respective of political case. So we can see, for example, France and United Kingdom act as distribution of Chinese surveillance technology. In the case of in Spain, it's supply and service camera in competition with China in the case of the Sweden. So when we see the situation as a whole, we can see that even China dominates the facial recognition technology, the vertical integration of the sector. The other countries participated, at least for example, in the softwares to analyze the facial recognition, etc., or distribution the Chinese technologies. One of the other finding we did that the implementation of Cyrus, the source of funding of the acquisition of the implementation of this surveillance infrastructure is multiplicity of sources, has been included federal public banks and international funds. So we can see even the not only the Brazilian banks, public federal banks as BNDES, but also the World Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank funding this kind of operation to buy this kind of technology for local government. This is important to try to show that it's a more impressive phenomenon, not just local China with local government or federal government, but when you see as a whole the problem, you see different actors participating or in the infrastructure, or in this case, in the funding, the acquisition and implementation of the digital surveillance systems. And we try to show some examples to prove this point of view. And to the end, the final finding, as expected in the Northeast, due to the underdevelopment region in Brazil, the major constraint for the spread of digital surveillance technology, lack of proper infrastructure. This is a problem. Brazil, it's a underdeveloped country, and it's very unequal when we see the region level of analysis. And Northeast has many problems, more than other regions, about infrastructures, and the China trying to act in the infrastructure, not only in their surveillance system, but also in the technology. In this context, for example, the operation of Huawei and ZTE in the region show difference from those of Hikvision da Rua. While there are of surveillance camera with facial recognition, Hikvision da Rua surveillance only strategies that mean to just provide a software, while Huawei and ZTE, who operate in a different layers of an integrated approach of the expansion in the region, and are able to implement vertical and horizontal integration strategies. This is important because we think that it's important to look to this problem in 2 points of view. In the first one, vertical integration strategy, we need to see the surveillance cameras application, which this enterprise expand the application layers after they get a foothold of the equipment and the infrastructure telecommunication proper. So we see a vertical integration, sector integration. From the end is the cameras, and the beginning it's the infrastructure of telecommunication proper. When we see from the point of view of horizontal integration strategy, the surveillance marks at the end of point in the application from where they seek to expand and further other service in the other sectors, particularly in the government service such as education and health. So the surveillance market is not just acting the security systems, but also in education, the health systems. So this is something across many aspects of the common life, not just from the purpose of the security purpose. As conclusion, to finish the presentation, despite the anti-China US foreign policy in the form of anti-digital authoritarianism, which is growing, being pursued over peripheral countries and finds echoing the government Jair Bolsonaro, we find that in practice, there has been a broad and sustained procurement of Chinese surveillance technology and the associated infrastructure in Brazil, including by the government itself, the federal government, and its local government allies at the far right. Such procurement has been supported by the building up of political ties between China government across the political spectrum. I think this is one of the most important because which materialize through invitations that Chinese embassy to local government to visit China in the headquarters for text to envoy the technical missions to Brazil cities and states. So this shows that it's a very expansive process in Brazil, not just something localized that in the Bolsonaro government or the far right government. It's the more deep than we can expect. And to the end, in the case of the Northeast analyzed more detail, these partners interactions has explicit marked by China. State findings in a give particularly to relation Chinese tech firms and Brazilian state and the city government. Even though sometimes corruptions, accusations in bids that this relationship has become too close in some instances with China. And to finish the presentation, for the standard point of view of Brazil, and this is important to say, periphery in general to consume technology can be a mistake with development, because if the productive structure remains the same, we maintain and maybe turns worse, that the technological gap increase in the country depends on the new important product and the dependence, increasing the dependence. The dependence is another way to reinforce the dependence ties. And to the end, a policy that considers development and digitalization in the periphery should the production of technology in the periphery, not in the mere consumption. But we need to invest in the science and technology, research and development, education, to require to complete a different approach to the austerity-friendly education solutions provided by Chinese tech giants. That's it.
Thank you so much, Miguel.
And very interesting to hear my colleagues from South America. As I intend to show in this presentation, that the reality in Latin America is quite different from what could be expected in other parts of the world. And this is probably the case of the presentation I'm going to make today. Actually, just to give a bit of overview of what this case is all about. This case study reviews the model of digital village, which you're very familiar with, but in the way it was proposed by Alibaba in Mexico. And what's surprising about this model is that digital village in Mexico does not involve AliExpress or Taobao platforms. So it's a bit strange, but this is the way that they decide to go for in this implementation. And what I've seen in this model is that early developments might point to some efforts to reach some institutional agreement to certify some education institution. We've seen in previous presentations that training is mandatory part of every model, but the way that they implemented this model is that they expect higher education institutions to become the technology integrators for small enterprises. So this case targets the digital divide problem that characterizes many developing countries, but from a different perspective and a different strategy, probably. So what appears to be a digital market construction doesn't really incorporate all the features that were originally planned for Taobao. So and this is being left to the local institutions, and findings that we will see by the end of this presentation indicate that what appears to be a training center support program, it's rather some kind of tailored strategy around governmental partnerships. First, to target those untouched market segments, meaning those small enterprises. But in the more immediate, probably important way, it's that Alibaba is targeting larger exporters, and that's perhaps one of the key findings of this presentation. So let me start by showing some of the progress of this case. As you may know, China has been sold as a shining example of a country that is in the process of bridging this digital divide I just mentioned, especially through this platform giant Alibaba. So and the truth is that the Alibaba portfolio is very, very wide. It includes a lot of digital platforms, but I'm gonna focus only well, especially 70% of the incomes come from two platforms. That's Taobao and that's Tmall. And Taobao is actually the digital platform ecosystem that aims to support this digitalization of small enterprises. And that's what is being sold around the world as the model for digital divide, right? So I would say that this leading digital social e-commerce platform, which has been relatively successful, and I say relatively because there is a lot of criticism in China as well, but it's been very successful, relatively successful in China as a model that intends to push for digitalization, but it's based on what Taobao researchers call the e-shops. I mean, those virtual stores that commercialize products over the internet. And this is a key actor, a key stakeholder in the ecosystem. And that this is how the Taobao model became the Taobao village proposal from Alibaba to other countries in the world. And I will emphasize these e-shops because they are also absent in the Mexican model, and we need to put attention on that. Another part of the context has to do with this initiative, the Electronic World Trade Platform, which was mentioned before in this workshop. This is kind of a counter-hegemonic global trade discourse that intends to promote a different type of corporate-led inclusive globalization, which, according to this narrative, is aiming to empower small enterprises and young people to the use of digital technologies. And this is the way Alibaba has positioned its initiatives to many governments around the world. So those are the important aspects. So let me explain a bit how this initiative works, and then I will go straight forward to the Mexican case. This EWTP initiative has disseminated a vision of in many countries through what Alibaba calls the Alibaba Global Initiative. This is an initiative that was built by the Alibaba Business School, of course, based on focus on training. That's what we expected. But this institution that was founded in 2008 by Jack Ma was kind of a plan to share Alibaba's group experience to promote inclusive digital development in many countries. And they have a lot of educational initiatives, but mainly they're focusing on universities, entrepreneurs, policymakers, and they take advantage of the popularity of Taobao villages in order to disseminate across the global south the program in many countries. That includes Colombia, Mexico, Mongolia, Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, Philippines, Rwanda. I mean, the list can go on. And there has been some research about what Alibaba is doing in Asia and Africa, and we saw some important examples of that. I believe that there has been little empirical investigation what's happening in our regions like Latin America. So that's basically the main motivation for this research. So just before I start talking about the particularities of the model in Mexico, let me identify some of the characteristics of the Taobao model according to literature. And clearly the presence of digital technologies is one of the key characteristics. And but as Chinese efforts to bridge that digital divide are based on marketed proposals that complement technology deployment through an e-commerce platform, with training which focus on local entrepreneurs and site visits to social models. These are some features that start to come up, and that may characterize this type of model. You will see that they've been sorted in some particular way because I'm trying to obtain some categories of these features, and this is the way it's being developed in the presentation. So on the other hand, I mean, as you will know, digital growth requires investment, and the World Bank put a term for that type of investment. They call it analog complements. That means infrastructure, human capital, logistics, financial services, which are considered preconditions that need to be put in place for the development of an e-commerce initiative, and particularly in China. So this is another element that needs to be added to the model. And additionally, it's important to have an appropriate business environment. For example, an environment that encourages more business activities like tax policies, so that digital entrepreneurs and supply chains are interested in joining this Taobao initiative and eventually creating a new value network. So that's another important component. And additionally, these small business owners, the truth is that small enterprises have little understanding of digital technologies. So that's why it's very difficult to convince them about the benefits of digitalization, of digital transformation, and until they experience that technology. That's why experience is important. And that's why experiential learning has a key role in the Chinese model. And on the other hand, there are, as I mentioned before, there are some entrepreneurs that facilitate e-commerce, which are instrumental in the Taobao ecosystem. Those that I mentioned before, that are the e-shops, which are some kind of intermediaries to integrate local producers to the marketplace, and they are mainly formed by young educated people who initiate the new ventures for that purpose. They require technology tools such as some development tools for the platform and e-payment. I mean, all those tools are really necessary in order to make the technology work in the case of China. So some other reports have indicated that the small firms in China actually benefit more from the managerial orientation, learning, some sharing of how to use these technologies than the platform itself. So that means that this non-tangible element is important also for the model, and the digital platform actually takes the role of inspiring mentor, facilitator of the process. So that's another element that composes the model, and finally, what's important to understand is that in this Chinese model, digital entrepreneurs, the platform provider, governments are relevant influencers in the way the digital ecosystem is being developed, and the success requires, of course, the involvement of some local leaderships, including some associations. So as you can see, all these elements are being ordered in a particular way in order to propose some multidimensional structure that contains both content and process features that appear to be absent in traditional approaches for digital divide, right? But they are very much necessary for developing a digital market. So we can see that these content features include not only the presence of enabled technologies, but also all those necessary analog complements that defined by the World Bank for developing of this digital market, right? Physical infrastructure, internet connectivity, roads, etc. So all those are important. And in terms of process features, they mainly consist of a series of some strategic actions to achieve the digital inclusion of these small enterprises, which might include empowerment, meaning those characteristics that you saw before, source of direction, collaboration, control. I mean, all those are part of the leadership that belongs to this model. Some consideration to stakeholders and the developing of a digital ecosystem. So that's another dimension. And finally, an interactive learning-based approach to develop new capabilities, right? So these features constitute a framework in order to assess what's happening in the case of the digital villas model in Mexico, right? So, okay, so this is the country, as you will see, and basically this customized version of Alibaba is under the implementation in Mexico, and it's based on the participation of institutionalized, especially local governments, not the federal governments, but local governments and universities. And in this version of the program, as I mentioned before, it does not involve the use of any of Alibaba's platform, but they are using alternative technology vendors that are locally available. So one example of them is Mercado Libre. I mean, they're part of the initiative. That's an e-commerce platform from Argentina. And that's a bit surprising, but perhaps we need to understand why Alibaba has done this. So we have basically some knowledge, some questions that some process questions that tend to to understand what's the strategy of this Chinese conglomerate in doing that in Mexico, a bit of an analysis of the context of what's going on, and of course, how the initiative has gone so far. So those are the basic interesting part, the question that I have for this project. So let me start a bit historically how the initiative has started. And it started first with the state government of Guanajuato. So Guanajuato was the first to sign this agreement with Alibaba. That was back in August 2019. And the agreement considered only training, digital tools to support these higher education institutions and small enterprises in order for them to digitalize, and especially for some particular sectors like showmaking, agri-food, handicraft industries. So they want to develop some local industries in the state. In 2020, then it came the state of Sonora, which signed an MOU in order to train young people as training consultants that can encourage this sort of innovation and digital transformation among small enterprises and some regional associations. However, the initiative was canceled in 2021 because the government changed. So basically, they decided that they will not continue with this program. And then it came two more states, Querétaro and Puebla, and they signed this agreement in 2021 as well. And under the same model, the Querétaro government engaged, again, local higher education institutions, which received training from Alibaba, and certified 50 educators and around 1,000 students as training consultants to work with the 50 small enterprises. And in the case of Puebla, they involve a lot more higher education institutions, 15 in total, and they training 37 educators and more than 800 young trainees. What's important to mention is that this program are still ongoing. They haven't completed the term of the agreement, so it's still an ongoing process, and we need to wait a bit to see the results. Okay, so this is another important which I want to mention. In 2020, Alibaba launched Atomic ADA. This is Alibaba's group execution branch, and they set for Latin America. It was set up with the purpose to grow Alibaba.com and ATI services in the region, facilitated by the facilitated MOUs with the state government. So that's the main model. And when I mentioned, of course, they started Mexico, and so far they have done only Mexico, but they already talking to the government of Bolivia and Chile to extend this model. And what's interesting is that this name, Atomic ADA, is meant to be kind of a neutral space for ecosystem partners to work with Alibaba. According to the interviews, if they hadn't chosen this different brand, local players will be suspicious of working directly with Alibaba. So that's why they decided to use a different name. It's called a digital accelerator as well, and for the initiative in Mexico. So, and basically this is a 6-step process, which starts with the selection of some community that can supply regional products for the market. And so this selection is followed by the identification of some local higher education institutions whose educators receive training to obtain the certification from Alibaba. And the idea is that these educators are expected to train young students, which are the training consultants, which eventually become the consultants for the small enterprises, right? So and they I mean, both educators and trainees get their certificate after the process is completed. So that's basically the model that Alibaba has implemented, and it has been. The truth is that I haven't seen results yet from that particular model in terms of small enterprises being digitalized, but at least several states are very happy with it. So that in this year, Alibaba signed another MOU with Mexico's National Conference for State Governments. That means all the Mexican states under this framework of the EWTP, in order to expand that model to more Mexican states. And actually, some states like Querétaro expanded the model and they announced that the model will be an extension of the initiative to include more higher education institutions. And Guanajuato even went a bit further than that and signed another MOU with Alibaba to support export-ready firms, I mean, the largest firms of the state, in order to start using Alibaba.com platform for the B2B transaction, right? And there is another model too, but that's a bit independent, in which one higher education institution decided to sign directly with Alibaba in order to train its own professors and educators and teach their students on the model. So that's a different model. So in general, this is the way I see the models have been evolved. To start, there is one model centered on institutional commitment. Different process models have been facilitated by Atomic IDA, but one of them is the one that implies local government funding, and the implementation is being done by higher education institutions. That's the case of states like Guanajuato, Puebla, and Querétaro. And the goal is to support long-established small regional products like the ones I mentioned: shoes, wine, handcraft, etc. And help support these small producers. The second model has to do with the support that the academic institution can provide directly to small enterprises, and they invite those enterprises to be part of the network to facilitate the initiative. And this is some kind of invitation to become trainee partners for the institution in order to support the experience that the students can gain from this model. And the last one, which is the most recent, I'll say, is it has to do with this last MOU with CONAGO, with the Association of State Governments, in which the idea is to include larger exporters in the model. And so as of today, as I mentioned, the model, all the models are still ongoing. But according to Alibaba, the Digital Village Initiative has trained around 400 educators and 8,000 trainees, and 1,500 small enterprises have been involved in the program. Okay, so let me explain a bit the characteristics of this model in Mexico based on the framework I just mentioned. And there are many differences between the Mexican Digital Village model and what was proposed, was originally created in China. The first one has to do with technology. The Mexican version of Digital Village does not imply the use of the Alibaba platform, as I mentioned, but rather the application of digital solutions that are known and available locally in Mexico. This is different. I mean, the Chinese model emerges, and the only marketplace that connects sellers and buyers in China. That's the Taobao and the Tmall and so on. And the Chinese model originally includes the development of e-shops, which enable the organizational appropriation of e-commerce by small enterprises. And also, this is different because in Mexico, I mean, the AliExpress, which is Alibaba's B2C global platform, is available for Mexican buyers, but forbidden for Mexican retailers. I mean, they cannot access the platform to sell their products. So then how these technologies have been integrated depends really on higher education institutions, which make use of these temporary royalty-free digital tools to convince small enterprises to adopt their technology. So it's a completely different use of technology. So that's another characteristic. And local governments, in terms of another complements, local governments in China provide small enterprises with free wireless access to internet, distribution centers, roads, and everything that's needed to make e-commerce possible. However, in Mexico, small enterprises that participate in the initiative are required to have already all those conditions for the program to work properly, meaning internet connectivity. If the small enterprises do not have access to internet, they cannot participate in the program. So since there are complex challenges related to the construction of these other complements, some state governments like Puebla, Querétaro, intended originally to give priority to these vulnerable small enterprises, but they realized that it was very complex, and they decided to go with different enterprises that already had internet, already had access to appropriate infrastructure. I mean, they are really developing a new ecosystem, but they're trying to take advantage of what's already there in order to implement those models. But perhaps one exception is Guanajuato. They start to develop some analog complements, such as logistics, some physical space in the local villages, some financial services, some customized training, and perhaps the difference is because they have their own export facilitator facilitation agency that's working directly with municipalities and trying to make this program work differently. So in terms of empowerment, as in China, many small enterprises are unaware of what they can profit from a digital transformation initiative, and this brings about some initial reluctance to get involved in the program. So, but what's interesting here is that the context, I mean, the bad context helped somehow to digitalize many of these enterprises, in that COVID-19 actually forced many small enterprises to seek for digital solutions in order to remain in business, right? So this is a sense of urgency that made the program probably more interesting for many of these governments and small enterprises. But in contrast, small enterprises and digital enterprises in China were motivated by the appetite for doing business in the marketplace. And this is not the case in Mexico. They are not really looking for being part of Alibaba's marketplace, because there is no Alibaba marketplace. And so another type of empowerment has to do with higher education institutions. Training consultants participate voluntarily, but they see this participation as an interesting way to get this certification, and they are involved in the program. But the truth is that there is no development of local entrepreneurs. So these are just students working for a program for a very short time and trying to help these small enterprises digitalize. So that's another difference that's important. And basically, the way I see it, the enthusiasm that Mexican entities put in building digital village is associated with more with the positive results that China has, or Alibaba has assault about the Taobao, than the current results. That's another characteristic. In terms of leadership, the truth is that Atomic 88 or Alibaba have been successful in promoting higher education institutions to implementing these leadership positions in order to become the center of this.
Sorry, Guillermo, we're running out of time. If you don't mind starting to wrap up,
okay.
So we have time for Q&A. That would be great. Thank you.
All right, I go straight to the end presentation. Some insights, important insights. Okay, so as you saw, the analysis went on in order to explain each feature, each characteristic according to the Mexican model. Well, we see that some elements of the Taobao model are not only different but absent in Mexico. So that limits Alibaba's participation to the role of knowledge spillover and facilitator. And while in the Chinese model, Alibaba's digital platform interacts directly with small enterprises, the Mexican version relies on third parties. That means the higher education institutions. And the Mexican initiative does not consider the figure of the intermediary or the shop, nor does it seek to encourage a digital ecosystem of participants. The priority appears to be the integration of digital tools to fulfill imminent local producers' needs in order to gain this digital traction. So Alibaba lets state governments define the extent of each digital village program. So there are several versions of it within the Mexican territory, and that's another important consideration. And perhaps the lack of this proprietary digital marketplace to operate in Mexico discouraged Alibaba for taking such an orchestrating role. I mean, since they don't have this presence, there is strong competition from other platforms, particularly Amazon and Mercado Libre. So Alibaba could not offer a digital platform, and so they're recurring to these local vendors. And and it's clear that building a type of trust relationship with the government is more instrumental and for the implementation of according to the EWTP agenda. And the final outcome is depending on how local institutions integrate all these necessary digital and analog complements in the program. What I've seen is that Aliyah executives have been successful in gaining credibility with governments and many other partners in the country, and that's how they could expand the program to other goals like higher like bigger enterprises in order to start using the B2E platform Alibaba.com, and perhaps this is the short-term final outcome of the initiative, to reach those enterprises in order to get those large clients for the company. So I will skip this part in order to, but of course there are some improvements that can be made to the program in order to make it work in Mexico. And I will leave this for the paper to be read. And thank you very much.